Hello everyone, and welcome to a second episode of our double feature here for Recipe for Reality Small Bites. It has been a little bit of a while since I've been doing these episodes because life got in the way, it got crazy, but I'm here, back, rejuvenated by this Traitors US Season 3 season premiere, as well as the airing of Traitors UK Season 3, though this is going to be solely talking about the US side of things, even though there are also some Canadian players in the mix, and you know what, on Traitors US they also have a British Royal, so really I can include anyone I want on this list, and that list is the top 10 Survivor US players I want to see on the Traitors US. Now, obviously, there are not going to be spots for every single Survivor player to be on the Traitors, unless this Traitors thing goes on for hundreds and hundreds of years. There are just so many great players to choose from, but I do think, the fact that we got 4 players on this new recent season of Survivor, of the Traitors, you have Rob, you have Carolyn, you have Tony, and you have Jeremy. I think the fact that you have been getting some big legends, I think now there is room to have about 3 or 4 survivors on a given season. And if this show does still take off, we're still going to have a lot of room for a lot of great Survivor players. Now, obviously, I did have to make some cuts. I did narrow it down to 10 players, but I did want to give at least some shout outs to some honorable mentions who I did consider for this list. Now, obviously, there are a lot of great players to choose from. As I said, if the show went on hundreds and hundreds of seasons, we'd be able to fit them all on. But I think the problem is you also have to take into account how iconic are they? Like, there are some deep cut players I would love to see. Like, I would love to see Chris Noble on the Traitors. But is anyone really thinking about Ghost Island and not thinking about Dom and Wendell? I think Chris Noble now, his ship has sailed. I mean, I think of like Survivor Gabon. You have Randy, you have Crystal, you have Kenny, some iconic characters of that season. But I think now in the grand scheme of Survivor, like those names aren't as much on the forefront of Survivor players' minds or Survivor fans' minds. And I do think for the Traitors, I mean, look at the people they're getting. They're getting Tony, they're getting Parvati, they're getting Sari, they're getting, even Carolyn, who is a new player, but still a mega fan favorite of the last few years. You either need to strike the kettle while it's hot and while these players are very popular, or you need to go back and find actual bona fide legends like Boston Rob, Jeremy, Tony, Stephanie LaGrossa, all these players that are clearly big names, not just in Survivor, but in the reality television lexicon. And I think that's where I wanted to approach this list from. So I do have some deep cut winners. I have Sophie Clark on the list. I have Kim Spradlin. I have Vesepia, the first black winner of Survivor. But the only thing is, like, I don't know if these names are going to be these heavy hitter names that Peacock is going to be like, we need them on our show. And that pains me, but I think when narrowing down the list, I needed to think about who was iconic enough to be on the show and who the fans would want to see and who would also be really great television. Because I'm not just going to pick good players. Like, I would love to see Ethan Zahn on the Traitors because I love Ethan Zahn, but do I necessarily think he would be the best traitor? Do I think he would be a great faithful? Probably, but he wouldn't be the most charismatic television, I don't think. I think he'd be really nice, but I think he would kind of fit into the Wells mold that we just saw on the the US premiere. I don't want to spoil how Wells did, but I think he would kind of fit into that archetype, and that's why I also had to think about archetypes. Who are going to be the best faithfuls? Who are going to be the best traitors? So in the end, I did pick 10 people who I think could be on this list, and I did kind of determine whether or not I'd want to see them as a faithful or as a traitor. But let's run through some honorable mentions. I obviously think Richard Hatch's name is probably always going to be in circulation, though I think with all the controversy, there are several people I would like more than Richard Hatch. I think Jerry Manthe would be a really strong contender for this. She is the original villainess of Survivor, so I think there's a real possibility that Jerry ends up on the Traitors someday. It's just she wasn't in my top 10 players, though she would be in the top 15 to 20 range for me. Again, there are so many Survivor players to choose from. I considered Lex from Survivor Africa and All Stars. I think especially with Boston Rob, it would be really cool to see him back, but I also think it would be more fun to see him with Boston Rob. So I think on his own, Lex would be fun, but I think the opportunity could have been this season to have Lex and Rob on, especially given how Tony and Rob's kind of rivalry, friendship kind of, formulated on this Traitors season so far. I think it'd be really cool to see what happened with Lex and Rob, but ultimately he didn't make the list. I think Jonathan Penner would be great TV. I think Jonathan Penner would be really shady early on, and I think it would get a lot of eyes on him, and I think it would be really fun seeing how he navigated that. But I also think due to his personal life, I don't necessarily know if he's willing to go all the way to Scotland to do the Traitors. I think he might just be content, doing his own thing, especially, with the passing of his wife. He might not be ready to step back into reality television. Same with Yul Kwan. Yul went on Survivor kind of wanting to play for charity, play for Jonathan's wife. I think Yul, though, would be great on Traitors. I think he's so analytical and so intellectual and so smart that he would be a great faithful, but I'd also love to see what he does as a traitor. But ultimately, there were just not enough spots on this list. Todd Herzog is a really tough cut for me. One of my favorite Survivor players, the first Survivor winner I ever watched. The only thing is I think there's one other player on Todd's season who's slightly more iconic, at least nowadays. And I think if you were to put Todd on on the Traitors now, I think some of the newer players wouldn't even know who he was. And I think that's a real disservice. But I also think if they're going to pick someone, they're going to pick someone who is a heavy hitter. And I just don't know if Todd is a heavy hitter right now, though I do want to see Todd come back for Survivor 50. And if Todd wins Survivor 50 and becomes the third two-time winner of Survivor history, then put him on the Traitors, and I think he would just wreck house. I think he would be completely fantastic on that show. I do have some villains on my list. Coach was a consideration. I think he'd be a real buffoon in the Traitors. Russell Hantz, obviously, probably really wants to be a traitor, wants to be on the Traitors. I haven't asked him. I haven't looked at his social media to know if he would be interested, but I don't know if Peacock would be interested in him. I think the Russell Hantz train might have sailed by now. I don't know. Trains don't sail. I should have said boat has sailed. Otherwise, Russell Hant's not going to be on Traitors, I don't think, anytime soon. And if he was, I think it would be a little controversial, even more controversial than Tom Sandoval is on this season, because Tom's kind of pathetic. But Russell is just a bully. He's just a mean person. But who's to say? Who knows? Maybe they'll put him on there. It's Peacock. It's not CBS. Ciara Easton, another villain that I think would be really good, especially her big moves mentality would be really fun to watch. Chaos Cass, obviously it's in the name. Chaos Cass would have been in my top 15. It's just there's so many good options to choose from. From Survivor Co. Wrong, I considered pretty much the entire final three. Aubrey would be great on the show, though I did find her entertainment value every season she was on. It's slightly diminished, so I don't know if she'd be the most riveting TV. I think if you had Aubrey fresh off of Co. Wrong go in play Traitors, I think it would have been a lot of fun. Same as Ty. I think Ty pulling that move on Scott and Jason makes me really intrigued in the prospects of seeing Ty on the Traitors, but I also don't know how he would do if he were a traitor. I don't think he could handle the deception and manipulation. Even on Survivor, it was very tough for him. So I don't know if it would work for him. And then the third party of that final three we'll have to save for a little later. But some winners, I considered Sarah Lacina, obviously, because, you have Tony, you got to have Sarah. But I honestly think we've seen enough of Sarah on reality TV. I think we can give our chance to a few other people. Tommy Sheehan, a good winner, but I don't necessarily think he's the most popular pick on the board. Some other popular picks, they didn't win the game, but Dominic Abate came very close to winning the game and very close to this list. We saw him on the challenge. He was great. I love the idea of having Dom and Wendell or Dom or Wendell on the Traitors. It's just, I think they're just slightly heavier hitting names. Davey was a really tough cut for me. I know he was an alternate for this season of the Traitors. I just don't necessarily know if the casuals are really, really, really chanting for Davey to come back, though I would love to see Davey back on our screens because I think he's a very savvy player. Also from David vs. Goliath, I had so many considerations here. I had Angelina, who would be terrific. Mike White would be a lot of fun, especially because it's a short commitment and he could drink all the wine he wants and he doesn't have to be in the jungle and, he loves reality TV. Why not bring Mike White on? He's a celebrity, but so is everyone on the Traitors, so I think it would be an even playing field for him. Natalie Cole would be epic to see on the Traitors, but ultimately didn't make the list here because of just space in my top 10. Some new era players. I would love to see Shan and Ricard on the Traitors, but ultimately just not enough room, especially considering how many villains I already put on my list. Marianne would be great, though we did see her play on RHAP's Traitors, so I think that kind of satisfied that itch. Jesse would be great, but maybe he's a little too quiet for the Traitors. Emily Flippin would be fantastic, but I also think Emily Flippin has kind of grown as a person, and I don't know if she would be as much of a chaotic player as we would wish for Emily. I think if we were to put Emily from the first 3 days of Survivor 45 on the island in the Traitors house mansion, I would love to see that, but I think Emily now would play it a little bit too chill. I did consider Dee. She's a great winner. I just didn't, consider her in my top 10. Liz would be really fun to watch. She would have some meltdowns. It'd be great. And then I had a plethora of Survivor 47 considerations. I considered Saul. I think Saul would be great at the round table. I love his reaction shots. I would put Andy in there. I think Andy would bring a lot of great chaos. I think Teeny would be a really savvy player in the Traitors, especially because Teeny's reads weren't perfect on Survivor, and honestly, bad reads are part of what makes the Traitors very fun and very interesting. And then the last person who was like the number 11 on the list, but it was a little bit of recency bias, so I decided to keep her off, and that was Genevieve. I would love to see Genevieve on the Traitors. She's also Canadian, so I don't know if she would play on the Traitors US or the Traitors Canada. Obviously, we saw Erica from Survivor 41 play on the Traitors Canada, so I do think there's a world we could get Genevieve on the Traitors Canada, which would be really fun. Though now looking at it, I do actually have one Canadian contestant on my top 10. Oh well, let's get into this top 10 though, and I'm actually going to start it with someone that I alluded to earlier when I said that I didn't think Todd would necessarily make it on, but there is one more iconic presence from his season that would, and that is Amanda Kimmel. And she's going to start off the top 10. The main reason I want to see Amanda Kimmel in the Traitors US season is not necessarily because she's the most riveting TV or she's the best game player, but I think you see Cirie play. Cirie wins. You see Parvati. She plays a really good Traitor game. I would love to see what the third of that fourth Black Widow brigade does. And obviously Natalie Bolton would be a cool pick, but I think Amanda's the last of those big three Micronesia women legends to play the game. And actually looking at my list, I do have another Micronesia woman on my list. But I think of that big three, like Black Widow brigade, if you have Cirie, you have Parvati, I feel like you need to have Amanda to kind of just fulfill the prophecy, kind of round out the trifecta. And I honestly think Amanda would do very well as a faithful. I think she would be a really great faithful. I think she's honest and really loyal, but also a terrible liar. So I don't think you could make her a traitor. But I think also because she's a faithful and she's a terrible liar, when she's not lying, I think she'd be really easy to communicate with. I think she could probably suss out some deception, though we also saw her a little manipulated by Parvati on Heroes vs. Villains. So I think there's also a world where Amanda would be a flame out. But either way, I need Amanda on the Traitors. I've had Cirie, I've had Parvati. I need to complete that prophecy. Moving on to number 9, a character that's very similar to Amanda in the fact that she's not like the biggest, most like bold, zany character in television history, but she is clearly a great Survivor player. She's made the finals twice, won once, and she has been a really constant presence on the challenge, and that is Michelle Fitzgerald. And I think Michelle, the thing is, I think the challenge is the thing that's punching her ticket to the Traitors. I don't think it's Survivor. I think she's great on Survivor. As I said, she's won once. She's made it to the final Tribal Council twice. But I really think just her presence being this big challenge competitor, making it so close to winning the challenge, as far as like last week, coming very, very close to winning. I think Michelle has now made a name for herself in reality television. She's shown she can be cutthroat. She's shown she can get into some drama. She kind of is that well-rounded reality TV persona that you want on a show like the Traitors, who can get down and dirty and who can like mouth off and fight with you, but who also has a lot of intellect and has experience and is a good challenge competitor like for those missions. So I would love to see Michelle on the Traitors, especially because I think at this point everyone now doesn't underestimate Michelle. I think everyone is now kind of on the same wavelength that Michelle did deserve to win over Aubrey, and even if they aren't in agreement of that, they've been able to see through her games on Winners at War and through all of her performances on the challenge that she is a very good reality television competitor, and she brings a lot of drama. So I would love to see Michelle on my screens, and I honestly would love to see her as a faithful. I do think her as a traitor could be interesting, but I think her as a faithful, I just think it would lead to more drama because she would be calling people out. People wouldn't believe her. There would be fights, but ultimately I do think because she is so social and so likable, I do think it would make for an interesting dynamic if she were to suss out a traitor. Maybe she does the Sandra thing of trying to befriend the traitors to later cut them later in the game. I don't know. I think Michelle as a faithful would be really fun to see. Now, speaking of faithful, you had to think of this person when you thought of traitors because this is one of the most iconic faces of Survivor. I don't think this person would be great on traitors. I think this person would be rather bad on traitors. But when I think of iconic Survivor figures, there's one name from the hero side of things that pops into mind as a faithful, and that is Rupert Bonum. And I know Rupert would probably be out in the first 2 or 3 episodes if he were a traitor. Like, I don't think he would play the traitor game very well. He is not deceptive. He wears his heart on his sleeve. He's very much an open book. So I don't want to do that to him. I don't want to make him a traitor. But I do want to see Rupert as a faithful because he is the ultimate faithful. He is the ultimate hero of Survivor. But also, Rupert gets angry. When he gets angry, he gets really angry. And I think you give him a read and he's wrong. You know, I could see Rupert, you know, having a real great fight like we're used to seeing in Pearl Islands and All Stars, you know, who voted for me? Like, I would love to see a moment like that happen if someone was like, I don't know, Rupert, I think you might be the traitor, I think that would be a really, really fun arc. I don't think he would do very well. I think his reads would not be that good. I also think if he were a traitor, he would be sussed out immediately, because if you make Rupert a traitor, he's going to change his demeanor a little bit. I mean, I just don't see him having that lying, deceptive side to him, but I would love to see what he would bring to a season, because he is less strategic than all the rest. I would love to see what you do when you put someone who's from Survivor, but who is not a strategist from Survivor, because look at who they've had on. Suri, a strategist. Parvati, a strategist. Tony, Rob, Jeremy, even Carolyn was zany character, but a strategist. I think the closest person to Rupert has been Stephanie LaGrossa, but Stephanie LaGrossa isn't a huge personality in the way Rupert is. So I would love to see what happens if you bring Rupert into the Traitors. Moving on to number 7, the other woman from Micronesia that I alluded to, I didn't even realize when I made this list that 2 women from Micronesia made it on, but it is Eliza Orans. And I think Eliza, the thing is, her career as a prosecutor, as someone who is into politics and, very, very prominent, public defender, I think it would be really fun to see her in the Traitors. I think she would also be a faithful. I think whenever you have a chance to make a cop or a lawyer a faithful, I think it adds some real intrigue, because if their reads are right, it's very impressive, because that's what they do for a living. But if their reads are wrong, it could be very controversial. It could be very interesting to see what happens if Eliza has bad reads. What if she isn't able to read the circumstance? What does that bring to the character and the story of the season? That being said, I'm also thinking about it, and how cool would it be if you have Eliza, who's a lawyer, be a traitor also. I think the problem with Eliza is that she wears so much of her thinking on her face. She's a very open book, but also so is Carolyn. And Carolyn right now, at least the time of recording this, is doing a very good job as a traitor. So honestly, I think Eliza could go either way. I'm going to stick her as a faithful, though, because I do like the prospect of her kind of getting to the facts and trying to analyze everything. And also, I mean, think of it's an effing stick moment for Micronesia. The fact that, like, if she clocks a traitor and other people don't believe her, she's like, guys, he's an effing traitor. I don't know. I could see Eliza having moments like that, and I would really like to see what happens if you put Eliza on the Traitors US. But moving on to number 6, the next 3 picks actually are all new era picks. As I said, you need to be an icon of Survivor to get onto the Traitors, or you need to be a very recent fan favorite like Carolyn. So I'm picking 3 very recent fan favorites. The first one is kind of the more no-brainer pick, I think, to be included in the Traitors, but the one that I'm probably least excited of the 3 to see, only because I know exactly what to expect from them, and that is Jam Jam. But regardless, whether or not I know exactly what to expect from him, I still want to see Jam Jam on the Traitors. I think Carolyn being on the Traitors is making me really like this idea of having these new era fan favorites on the show, because Jam Jam is still so fresh. I feel like he's only played once. We only know 1 game of his. So put him in the house, make him a traitor. Would he be able to have as impeccable a social game as he did on Survivor in the Traitors mansion? And I do think he would 100% be a traitor. I think Jam Jam as a faithful would be a wasted opportunity. I think, like Carolyn, you make Jam Jam a traitor and kind of see what deception he can run, and I think it'd be really, really fun. Moving on to number 5, though, another new era player. This is someone who probably could be on the Traitors Canada, now that I'm thinking about it, but honestly, I need to see her in the Traitors Mansion alongside my number 4 pick, so I'm going to do them together, number 5 and number 4, because I need them both in the Traitors Mansion at the same time, and that is Venus and Q. These were the 2 big polarizing figures of 46. Obviously, not a lot of people on the island like Venus, not a lot of people on the island like Q, but the audience loved them. The audience loved hating them, and I loved loving them because I think they're just really fun characters. But I think there's something to be said about these characters that are just so polarizing that the audience can't help but lean in and want to see them on their screens, even though they are not necessarily rooting for them. And I think that's a really cool kind of morally gray area to live in when you're on a show like The Traitors, where you have to be lovable but also be willing to cut people's throats because you have to blend in. And I do think Venus and Q would both either do really, really well or really, really badly at being traitors. I think in my ideal scenario, Venus would be the traitor and Q would be the faithful, because I think Q as a faithful would just kind of lead to so much paranoia. I think if Q was a traitor, he'd know a lot more of what was going on in the house and he'd be able to pull it off a little bit more cool and confidently and collectedly. But I think if Q didn't know who the traitors were and he was trying to figure them out, I think that could lead to some really fun moments. Now, obviously, if he were a traitor, you could have Q say, "Oh, big mistake, and then send people home. So I think it could work both ways for Q, but I'm leaning toward Q being a faithful. And as for Venus, I want to see Venus as a traitor. I think it'd be a little obvious, but I also think because Venus is just typically underestimated and people don't hear Venus's voice, I think we could get a similar vibe to Carolyn, where she's a traitor, but no one listens to her and she gets mad, and maybe she sells one of her traitors out because she's petty. I think Venus and Q both could be very fun faithfuls or very fun traitors. So I think, honestly, put them both on a season, maybe have Q as a faithful and Venus as a faithful, and have Venus get recruited. I have no idea. I just think the two of them in the mansion together would be so fun to watch. But now back to some of the older school players. This player at number 3 isn't necessarily old school as much as he is like Survivor middle school. He's from the 30s. When I was listing all the David vs. Goliath players, I purposely didn't mention this guy because I put him on my top 10, so he's not an honorable mention. It is Christian from David vs. Goliath. Now, obviously, a lot of people want to see Davey because Davey was an alternate on this past season. A lot of people probably want to see Angelina or Mike White or even Natalie Cole. But for me, Christian just feels the most traitors coded. I feel like Christian, you obviously would think he would be a faithful, this really smart guy, this really endearing guy trying to suss out all the competition, but I also think there's a really intriguing world where Christian is a traitor. And seeing how smart he is, seeing how savvy he is, seeing how analytical he is, and how much his mind and his brain works over time, I really think it would be fun to see Christian, this sweet, unassuming, glasses nerd Christian, this professor, kind of school everyone else and become a traitor. And I think of everyone so far that I've talked about, I think Christian would have the best chance at winning the traitors, because I don't think people would expect him first and foremost as a traitor, and I think all his lies would be very fascinating to see him navigate. So yes, a lot of people would think immediately that Christian would be a faithful, but I think if I'm a producer and I'm putting Christian on the show, I'm making Christian a cloaked traitor and seeing what happens. I think it'd be a lot of fun. Number 2 is a very chalk pick. It's someone I want to see on the show. It's someone I'm sure all of you want to see on the show. If you're listening to me on YouTube, there's a chance that you watch another Survivor YouTuber, and that is Mr. Rob Sesternino, who we need to see on the traitors. I kind of debated back and forth whether I want him to be a traitor or a faithful. I think he just fits the faithful mold better. I think making kind of snarky comments and little joke asides as a faithful would just be a perfect package for Rob Sesternino. Let him play detective a little bit. Let him just kind of be this social guy hanging out with all these reality television stars. I think if you made him a traitor, it would honestly be a little harder for Rob because, you know, these are all his friends at the end of the day. These are the people that he's having for interviews. Like, I think a lot of people are hoping Rob comes back for Survivor 50, and I think part of the fun of that is like seeing Survivor, you know, seeing how much it's influenced his life, seeing it come full circle, seeing him play with all these players that have kind of known him as a podcaster now, more so than a Survivor player. I think there's a lot of intrigue, but I think because he's a podcaster, I think it would be very tough for him on Survivor 50 because he would either be everyone's best friend and everyone would just kind of try to have him as a number in alliance, or everyone would see him and be like, he's so well connected, we have to get him out. Whereas here in Traitors, I think because there's only a few Survivor players on every season, I don't think his target would be as big. And also, you know, Rob is someone who, even if he did get recruited as a traitor, I think could have a lot of fun with it. But I really want to see Rob as a faithful on the Traitors. I think it'd be a lot of fun, and I think it's bound to happen. I think of all the shows, also it's the shortest time commitment to where he doesn't have to commit to starving for 20-something days on an island. He can instead be in the Traitors Mansion for a week, and I think it's a short little vacay stay for Rob. He would still be able to podcast. He would only have to take a week off of work. I don't know. I really want to see Rob as a faithful in the Traitor's house, or even as a traitor. I just think it would kind of lead to a few conflicts of interest if he had to murder all of his fellow reality TV friends every single night. But hey, that could be part of the intrigue. But number 1, no-brainer. As soon as I thought of the Traitors as a concept in tandem with Survivor, I was thinking, like, who are the major Survivor villains they have to get for the Traitors? They have to get Boston Rob, and they got him. They have to get Parvati. They got her. They have to get Sandra. They got her. Who's next on like the villains Mount Rushmore alongside Parvati, Boston Rob, and Sandra? It's Johnny Fairplay. Johnny Fairplay is the slam dunk number 1 contender, especially having gone on House of Villains. And I didn't watch House of Villains, but I heard that Johnny Fairplay was a little underwhelming on House of Villains. But I think in the midst of other villains, maybe Johnny Fairplay doesn't stick out. But in the midst of other just reality celebrities like housewives and bachelors and bachelorettes, I think Johnny Fairplay would still be the villain. And I think it'd be a lot of fun to see him either be the Tony, who everyone expects to be a traitor but is actually a faithful, or he is a traitor but it's almost too obvious that they don't suspect him. But also because it is a little bit of an older, wiser Johnny Fairplay, maybe he would be a little bit more calculated, a little smarter, a little less spontaneous in his fights, in his arguments with people, in the ways he would go about tricking people. So right now I would say I would want Johnny Fairplay as a traitor, but I also think there's intrigue to him being a faithful as well. But he is one of the most iconic television villains, period. So I feel like it's bound to happen at some point to get him on there. Also because I know he kind of burned his bridge a little bit with Jeff Probst, and I know they've repaired some things, but I don't know how necessarily likely it is that he'll be on Survivor, or CBS projects like The Challenge. Obviously, he won't be on The Challenge. I don't think he's young enough or in shape enough for that. But I do think, Peacock, that's a different ballpark altogether, and maybe they would be willing to take on Johnny Fairplay and make him into a new kind of rejuvenated reality TV star from this. And I know he was on House of Villains, but I really do think putting him on the Traitors, that's kind of where his wheelhouse is. Don't put him with the other villains. Put him with all the other heroes. Make them cry. Make them suffer. Make them whine. Make them angsty. Put them on edge. I think that's what Johnny Fairplay would bring to any season. And whether or not he's an early out or makes it to the end, honestly, I think he'd probably be the first traitor that people would suspect, and he'd be out very soon. But even for one episode, I think Johnny Fairplay would bring it in a similar way that like Johnny Bananas brought it, in a similar way that I think, a lot of great first boots like Dorinda brought it. There's only a short amount of time we have with them, but they still make the most of that short amount of time. So that would be my number one pick. If I had to pick anyone right now to go into the Traitors Mansion, I'm sending Johnny Fairplay in there. But really, all of these 10 are really great prospects, especially having some of them together. Like, put Q and Venus on a season together. Put Rupert and Johnny Fairplay on a season together. What would happen? Put Michelle and Amanda, two people who are very similar archetypes, on a season together. What would that bring? So I just think there are so many great options for Traitors contestants, and all the honorable mentions are people that, if the Traitors is on for 50, 60 seasons, we can get all of them on. But I think for now, those are the 10 I would prioritize. Maybe put Venus on Traitors Canada, and maybe I can slide someone like Todd Herzog on the list for Traitors US. But either way, that is my list. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more Recipe for Reality Small Bites, especially as the Survivor 48 season approaches. We're going to be talking all things 48 very soon, but right now we're in Traitors season, so enjoy the Traitors US Season 3, enjoy the Traitors UK Season 3, and let me know down below which contestants from Survivor you would like to see on the Traitors US. Otherwise, that's it for me. Thank you so much, and always be treacherous.